Hello and welcome to the second episode of Instruo Interviews. I'm Anna Calandra, the presenter of this series. This interview series was made with SMEs in mind. We're trying to help people by supplying expert advice from ourselves and our lovely guests. Before I introduce our guest for today, I'd like to hand you over to Furqan Baig, who is our Managing Director.
Hi, I'm Furqan, and at Instruo Group, the thing that I love most about my work is that I'm able to help companies. I'm able to strengthen their finance departments and make them work with the wider business. And the reason that really helps businesses is because we take the pressure off that from them. And that gives them the space, the room, and the time to be able to develop new ideas and grow.
Thanks very much, Furqan. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Councillor Lynne Short. Welcome, Lynne.
Hello, thank you. Welcome to you both.
Thanks a lot. So let's start with a big picture, shall we, Lynne? What's your story?
My story? Oh my goodness, how long do you have? I'm actually from Dundee. I was born here, and I spent the first 2 years within the city, and then I moved to a place called Invergowrie, which is just outside of Dundee, and was brought up outside of Dundee. But if you open me up inside, it'll just say Dundee running through me. I'm a real strong, passionate advocate for the city, because it's given me everything that I have. It's given me the confidence to do everything that I've done in my life. I've worked in polypropylene, I have worked in bars, I've worked in travel and tourism, I've worked in property, and now I'm of course in politics. So quite a varied career, but ultimately I think the thing that strings through is I've always been really interested in people and helping people and satisfying that need, whether it was for a drink in the bar, a nice holiday, or now helping them with any problems that they have that a politician can help them with.
Fantastic, I love that. So I guess my big question, obviously being that you've always been able to help people, why politics?
I am very, very, very keen to see Scotland become an independent nation, which is my kind of raison d'etre as far as the politics is concerned. Actually the job of a politician is that vehicle, and I believe that good governance will deliver the independence that we're looking for, and the good governance comes through having strong politicians who have a strong understanding of what their policies are, and what they can deliver for the people that they represent. And I have hopefully a lot of transferable skills that mean that I can do that good delivery and good governance.
Fantastic. So you're a fairness and equality spokesperson, if I'm not mistaken. What does that include?
Actually, believe it or not, fairness, equalities and older persons. And basically, I am the council spokesperson for the 10 characteristics which are protected through the Equalities Bill. And in addition to that, there's a focus on the older people within the city. I hasten to add, the UN decides what an older person is, and an older person is anybody over 50, so quite a large percentage of population. And in addition to that, fairness is really about some of the problems that we have in the city with regards to the socio-economic problems that we have. So bringing to the fore and doing things like working with people for the living wage accreditation. And next week is Challenge Poverty Week, so showing ways in which we can challenge poverty.
I wanted to ask you, Lynne, that obviously you're an advocate, very much an advocate for the living wage. Can you tell us a little bit more of your work in that area?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've always been a real strong advocate of the living wage. When I was in the role of convener of city development, it was something that I was really, really keen to see. And at that point, actually Dundee City Council became a living wage employer. And I saw it build across the city, always encouraging people along the way, to the point that actually what we do now is we have an ambition for a living wage city. And there's certain parameters that have been put in place for us to achieve that, but Dundee was the first UK mainland city to go for that aspiration, so it's really, really important. And the reason that it's important is because If you are paying the living wage, that living wage actually gets paid into your local economy. You tend to find that if you pay the living wage, it'll be used for things within the area. So it's almost a circular economy. And it's really important for people within our communities. So really, really strong advocate. And I like things that show Dundee to be leading the way, and we are leading the way in our living wage. It's actually obviously a really kind of difficult time at the moment, but today I'm with an employer who has actually done living wage accreditation during COVID. So to me, that's a massive statement to make at a time where lots of businesses are really worried about what's happening. And it's an SME, I mean, it's not one of the big sort of blue chip companies, it's an SME, which to me just says everything about the city and what we actually want to do for our fellow Dundonian. So that's kind of my background to the living wage. Next week is Challenge Poverty Week. And on the Monday, I'll be hosting and co-hosting, excuse me, with Living Wage, the Business Minister, Jamie Hepburn. So that'll be a good opportunity to discuss with him where we are currently with the living wage in the city. We actually have a small stakeholder group. And what we like to do is we like to work and encourage and help support local businesses, which are sometimes anchor businesses. So, for example, John Alexander Decorators, where I'm at the moment, he works with a lot of SMEs who come into his kind of courses and things, so he can kind of talk about why he's done it and hopefully encourage other businesses to do it. So these kind of anchor businesses really kind of lend themselves to being our advocates, so really good at and strong at encouraging them, and especially in their sort of areas. So last year there was a digital one, a solicitors came on, so all these different organisations can kind of lead their competitors, almost to the point where hopefully as consumers we will be keen to work with someone who's a living wage employer, or buy a service or a good from someone who's a living wage employer, because they put their employees at the heart of everything that they do as a priority.
That's a great point that you made, Lynne, and I see this very much a kind of shift in SMEs towards this type of ethical outcomes-based thinking where, you know, not everybody, but it is slowly shifting. I can see that a lot of SMEs are starting to think along the lines of working with other people that are very much ethical in their approach.
Maybe perhaps one of the other things that's worth focusing on is the fact that actually, as far as churn is concerned, for employers, if you can show your employees that you're invested in them by doing the best possible payment for the job that's done, you're investing in them, and so they're less likely to kind of jump about from employer to employer. One of the businesses within the city who sits on the Stephen Group, it's actually a security business, and you could imagine if you're turning over lots of people in a security business, PPE, which we all think about nowadays because of the situation that we're in, but PPE for someone who is in the security business, if you're having to buy that constantly because you're constantly having to refresh who your staff are, that's cost analysis is not positive. So for paying perhaps that bit extra wage, you're not having to do that continuous investment into that individuals that come and work with you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. It seems it's not just ethical, but it's logical. It's great that it seems like whenever there is, you know, a day for something or a month for something, you pick up on it. For instance, yesterday there was a special day of some sort, which I'm going to ask about in a second. And obviously this is Black History Month. We haven't spoken about that before, but I'm sure there are some very interesting things going on in Dundee. Tell us about what you did yesterday. I'd love for you to share that with our audience.
Oh, okay, so maybe take you back a little bit. This actually came about because each year, for the last number of years in Dundee, what's happened on the 1st of October is we have celebrated the UN Older Persons Day. 4 years ago today, I actually opened up an event which was a co-event, and it was Dundee Together, which was to stand up against racism, and then it was also the UN Older Persons Day. And a couple of weeks ago, we were having a sort of sit down in a stakeholder meeting to think, right, what are we going to be able to do this year because of obviously the confines of COVID, and on top of that, obviously, the older community. So we need to be very careful about how we actually framed it, because the other thing is how many of our older people would also have access for a Zoom meeting, that sort of thing. So kind of taken into consideration. So what we decided to do was we decided to, instead of having just a day, I took to our committee meeting on Monday a motion which said that Dundee would just take a whole year to celebrate our older community. So today is the first day, and in the day before, which was yesterday, I actually took part in the Age Scotland event, which was to Hadjar Wisht. I don't know if I have to translate, but Hadjar Wisht is to be quiet. So
okay, thank you for translating.
I had my wished for the whole day, so I actually went 36 hours without talking. So anybody who knows me will know that that is absolutely miraculous. But what I did was I managed to raise £100 of funds, and those funds will go towards investing in people who can phone into the older community, so there's a conversation. Because the reason for the silence is on an annual basis in Scotland, for almost half a week, over 200,000 people don't actually speak to anyone. So Age Scotland, from the money raised yesterday, can actually employ someone who will on a daily basis make these telephone calls. So that was yesterday's little venture into the unknown, was doing the sponsored silence. And so yeah, we're about to start a whole year of celebrating and supporting and helping and highlighting the older people in our communities. I think it's really an interesting time in the world when it comes to our older communities, because the dynamic of people who are in their 60s, 70s and 80s nowadays, kind of moving along from that generation that were involved in the war. And we're now at the point, my mother, she's 73, and she's keen to go to the Mary Kwan exhibition at the V&A because that's her era. And you know, our older people now are the ones that were around in the 60s when it was the Beatles and the Stones and all these bands and things that loads and loads of younger people nowadays know, and bands will reference as what sort of drove them to it. And we're actually at the stage now where the original teenagers are now our older people, so we've got so much to learn from them, because they've lived through that kind of angst of teenagers right through to that point where we are now. And they really are valuable resources for us, and really keen to support as much as possible and learn.
I love that, especially my mum being an older person and knowing all the lyrics to all the Beatles songs. That's something that I've always truly appreciated as a now 29-year-old. So there you go. It's a bit of a change of subject, but it's something that I definitely want to ask about. And for those watching who might want to get involved in politics later on, what advice do you have for them? How might they go about getting involved?
Think very carefully about it. I sometimes look upon it as wearing a cloak. Because if you go into politics, you suddenly become something that people, especially in this day and age of social media, think it's acceptable to discuss things about the way you look, the way you speak, the way you talk, everything about you, because they associate with you with something that they perhaps don't like. They see it as an opportunity to kind of vilify you. So first things first, is it something that you want to be in a position to take forward? We're coming up to the 2021 elections for the Scottish Parliament, and just last week, I think it was, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said, and this is really awful, to women, if you're thinking about doing this, you have to be prepared to get online abuse. And that's a horrible situation to be in. And I think it perhaps happens to women, and also probably happens to those people who also fall into the kind of equalities agenda. We seem to be much more targets for abuse than perhaps, I hate to use the expression, but male, pale and stale, who is the kind of recognised face of politics across the world. But if you have made that decision, I think it's a great decision and it's a great opportunity. And I would say find out what's happening locally. And that's the way to kind of tune into your local politics, and start to kind of understand how it works locally, and meet the local people, and get somebody, as Furqan had said earlier, get somebody to take you under your wing so that they can kind of help support you through the process, almost a kind of mentoring.
Brilliant. I've got a question here, Lynne. If we bring it back to, we've discussed politics a little bit, if we bring it back to business now, obviously you support SMEs, you know, you do a lot in the communities to support SMEs in Dundee, and that's a focus of yours. You've talked about some of the things that you've done there on a much larger scale. If we can talk about something a little bit smaller, maybe, what type of projects does supporting SMEs look like in Dundee for you?
I'm very fortunate that I'm actually representing a ward within the city centre, so I know a lot of what goes on in our city centre, and we're doing a lot of things at the moment to try and encourage people back into the city centres. I'm sure we all did it when we sat in lockdown. We suddenly watched the bank balance and thought, oh, where does my money go every month? So at the moment, it's kind of really important to sort of encourage that footfall back into the high street, because how easy is it just to kind of go online and buy something online? So our retailers need it. But then actually, so do our solicitors, because they need to do the leases, so do our surveyors because they need to do the lettings, so do our accountants because they need to count the pennies. So, you know, retailing is such an important part of that SME kind of circular economy that we really do kind of need to, as individuals, encourage each other to make use of SMEs. So that's one of the things, hopefully, that I can kind of bring home is, especially kind of shop locally. If you're in the wider region, then come into Dundee and shop regionally. But you know, that's how we will survive if we use these facilities. It's that situation, if you don't use it, you lose it. It kind of works with our SMEs as well. And yeah, our SMEs are our friends. They're our relatives, you know, they're our neighbours. So yeah, let's encourage them and let's support them.
My next question is actually part of the answer that you just gave, but maybe there's further insight that you could add. And that is, how has COVID-19 affected the local economy there in Dundee?
It is tough. It's really tough, really tough, and businesses are closing. And one of the most popular music venues in the city, just this week, it closed. And you know, the outpouring of love and memories and respect for the business has been absolutely amazing. But the reality is, it was a music venue, which was a bar, and also held events. It's not happening at the moment, so it's not a sustainable business. So yeah, it's really tough. That's only one, which, you know, was quite high profile. So there's lots and lots of really difficult decisions having to be made at the moment.
What advice, Lynne, would you give SMEs outside of Dundee who don't have the access to the support that they do here locally?
I guess every business has to have built into their business somewhere that kind of rainy day situation. And if a business doesn't have that rainy day situation, then how do they make it happen? So I've spoken to some of the local businesses and suggested early on during COVID that they spoke to their landlords, because there could be that there was an opportunity to put in a payment pause when it came to the building that they were in. Maybe other businesses could speak to their banks and their financiers and see if there's about an extension or maybe a loan. And if you're in a situation where you think, right, okay, just a couple of months extra support can make us and help us through this, then have those conversations. But also, I guess it's really important that people do have that kind of proper conversation with them as well, like the person with the bar in Dundee that closed it. They have made a really, really kind of important decision for them, but it was the right decision for them. And sometimes you have to make that decision that goes against all of your kind of heart and soul, but sometimes it's just got to be that sort of situation where you just have to say, now we have to close, and knowing yourself when is that right time, and getting as much advice and support as you can. Just today, a lady approached who wanted some support with answering questions around how can she work her business during this COVID period. And what I did was I asked her if I could also organise for her to meet with someone from Business Gateway, because it sounded like she could do with some bigger support than just support within the kind of looking at the actual delivery of her business, but actually looking at the wider business model. So yeah, Business Gateway is across the whole of Scotland. So yeah, use the tools that are available for you.
Absolutely. I think this is something that Furqan and I talk about quite a lot. Obviously, consultancy is a big part of Instruo Group, and he's been teaching me all sorts of things about future-proofing. No one could have anticipated COVID-19, that it was impossible to prepare for it. But in terms of now moving forward and having to expect the unexpected, there is advice that, we can give, that we can seek from councillors such as yourself, and hopefully working together we can actually make a difference.
I saw a really genius thing, and it was a few months ago now actually, and it was a company that made women's tights, and they actually did specials and got them out the door because they knew that they would have to do that. And people who've gone from making, I don't know, jackets, and now they're making face coverings, diversifying to the current situation as well is also something that may be possible. Just kind of changing what you do and delivering something different, even if it's short term. Right at the very beginning, one of our local gin distillers was making hand sanitizer, so they very quickly diversified. So there is opportunity, and sometimes, especially in our SMEs, we find these amazing entrepreneurs who will very quickly trigger something completely new for themselves because they just have that extra special thing that allows them to take it to the next step.
I have one last question for you, Lynne, because we're almost out of time, sadly. This video is going to be posted on multiple social media platforms. So my question is, how does having a social media presence help you do your job better?
I think in this day and age, it's almost impossible to be in the political realm without having a social media presence. I'm not going to lie, I took an 18-month pause from Facebook because it just became too horrific a place for me to inhabit. In June this year, I tipped my toe in, and then I came back for real on my previous account in June. And I just take it gently, day at a time. But I think it's really important that you do have it there. But I think it's also important that in my role, I work with the mainstream media, because as mentioned earlier, about older people might not necessarily be watching something like this. Can't stereotype across the board, but a lot of my community perhaps only get their news from the television and the newspaper. So it's important that they see me working hard for them in these mediums as well. And usually what happens is nowadays newspapers will have both mediums, so you've almost covered both areas by interacting with both.
I just have one last question for you, Lynne. The current environment where, we've talked about living wage, we've talked about business, we've talked about how politicians help local and national businesses. One thing that I've seen recently again is Obviously, there's a lot of redundancies happening. Apparently, we've not heard the last of it. There's going to be a lot more redundancies happening in the future. What advice would you give to these people that are unfortunately being, left out of a job? Is it feasible for them to think about starting a business?
I think the most important thing is to always get really good advice, really good advice. Look at your market that you want to go into, and also speak to people who are already in that market, or see what's happening in that market, because the last thing you want to do is flood the market. So, very careful about what you do. If people are going into a situation where it's redundancy, it's incredibly frightening, especially if they've been long-term in employment. The world of when you go to the job centre and read a card to get your next job doesn't exist anymore, and it's a bit of trepidation that people now find themselves out of work and having to find out where they go next and how it all works, and so it's very difficult. So I would definitely say people should reach out. Councillors, that's what we're here for. With my fairness hat on, I'm always happy to help support people and point them in the right direction. And yes, if you believe in yourself and you've done your homework and you think the market's there, now could be that's really that right time. In the same way that who would have thought 8 months ago that we would all be speaking in this way and holding meetings this way. So what COVID has taught us is that the world can throw everything at you and we do adapt. So yeah, I mean, it's a gamble. Life is a gamble. Every time we get up in the morning is a gamble. But what you need to do is you need to see, what actually am I gambling here?
No, that's a brilliant piece of advice. I think that's quite a comprehensive answer, and it gives everybody, the audience, hopefully, it gives them a good overall view. And it's a very real and a down-to-earth answer. And I appreciate you for that, because I know that's how you are, and I appreciate the work that you do. And it's a pleasure to have had you as a guest today.
Thank you very much for coming.
Your words are so kind and it's so very much appreciated. I do try to keep it real, representing the people of my city, and I think we do keep it real.
Keep it real should be your new slogan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn. And to our audience, thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels and join us next time. Thanks again.